Hey guys, welcome to another GameXplain discussion. I'm your host, Andrew Seegers, and this time we're again joined by Derek Binder to discuss the newly announced Pokemon games being Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire coming to the 3DS this November. So let's get started. Alright Derek, so this caused my complete surprise, as Nintendo's been doing a lot recently, actually. They just announced two new Pokemon games coming to the 3DS, except they appear to be based on two previous Pokemon games, being Ruby and Sapphire on the Game Boy Advance. So first off, I actually want to open with a Twitter question from Elliscore, and he asks, how hype is Derek? So how hyped are you, Derek, right now?
Well, not as hyped as you would think.
Whoa.
This isn't like X and Y to me, where it's a completely new generation. I mean, a lot of people saw these remakes coming, because that's just sort of been the pattern with Pokemon games before, and Ruby and Sapphire marked the time where I got out of Pokemon. So I don't really have that visceral connection that I did with, the first two remakes, being Gold, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Leaf Green, Fire Red. Now I did go back and play Ruby and Sapphire eventually, but it just didn't have the hold for me, because I believe by that point I already played Diamond and Pearl. So there's not as many memories here for me as there are for a lot of other people. And even when I went back and played it, this is not my favorite Pokemon generation. It's okay, but it didn't really do much for me.
Yeah, that's a little bit surprising to hear coming from you. So I guess one of the big questions on everyone's mind is this a new game or a remake? Now, unfortunately, the trailer doesn't really offer much clue as to which direction it might be going, but it does say epic new adventure and explore a dramatic new world. But I wanted to get your take on this. Where do you fall on this debate?
I am 100% convinced this is just a simple remake. There's a lot of ways you can interpret world. Like, a whole new world could be just the fact that this is probably going to use the X and Y engine, so it's going to be a major overhaul as far as graphics are concerned, compared to the game, especially compared to the Game Boy Advance. So I think that's what it's referring to. I think if it was a sequel, I think we'd see something more along the lines of what we saw for Black and White 2, where it'd just be a simple Pokemon Ruby 2, Sapphire 2. The fact that it has the same naming style as Leaf Green and Soul Silver and all those makes me think this is just a simple remake.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, especially given that there is a precedent for this. They have a clear pattern, basically, and they usually stick to that. With that said, and with also being said that I'm completely ignorant on every Pokemon game since Red and Blue, I'm leaning toward this being a brand new adventure. That would follow on, I guess, the story arcs of the original two games, because they do say epic new adventure and explore a dramatic new world, and those, I almost feel like that's lying if these aren't new takes on the, if this isn't a new adventure, as they say here. Like, if it is just a remake, I feel like that is misleading, and I'm not sure they would do it that way. So I'm actually leaning toward it potentially being a new one, but again, I I don't follow Pokemon games. But with that said, let's go with that line of thought for a second. If this were a new adventure, what do you think they could do with this? Like, how do you think they might be able to build on the original games? What could the premise be of this one?
That's kind of hard to say, because the premise of the original was wrapped up pretty tightly, just because we had Team Magma and Team Aqua, and whichever one you played, they both learned the lessons like, oh, we can't control these legendary Pokemon, and if we, because of that, we destroy the weather. So unless they go for a sequel idea sort of along the lines of Gold and Silver, where it's just remnants of those two teams trying to do the exact same thing, or trying to bring back their bosses, or trying to do something of that matter, that could be the case. Now, what's interesting here is that when people saw this box art for these two games, there's some interesting highlights on Groudon and Kyogre. They both have sort of like a glowing feature to them that doesn't look quite the same as they did in the original Game Boy Advance. Like, for example, Kyogre, sort of his lines glowed red in the opening cutscene, and here they're glowing blue, and they look a lot different. I've seen a lot of people comment and say, oh, does that mean they're getting Mega Evolutions? And I don't think that's the case, mainly because Mega Evolutions, other than Kangaskhan, usually denote a major change in appearance. These are just interesting glowing patterns. For these two, it's more cosmetic than anything else. However, this could link into the story if it is a new game. Perhaps they found a way to power up these Pokemon, making them even more devastating, and that's the storyline behind the game.
So you don't think Mega Evolutions will play a role in this game, or at least for not these two Pokemon?
Not until the post game. I think the way a lot of remakes go, like, if it's a remake, the way a lot of these go is that you get the regional decks where you're limited to the Pokemon that you have had in that game originally until you get the national decks, and that's when all the other Pokemon from the other generations come in. And I think that'll work the same way for Mega Evolutions. Like you'll probably get a Mega Ring at some point after the post game if this is a remake.
Now, did every Pokemon that Mega evolved in X and Y, was their physical form completely different than their previous evolution?
Yes.
Okay.
The only one that did not change at all was Kangaskhan. Mega Kangaskhan only had the baby grow up a little bit and jump out of the pouch. Every other one had a pretty significant physical change, as you saw with like Mega Mewtwo and all that.
So I'm conflicted on this. Again, being the ignorant Pokemon player here, like it does seem weird that they would highlight, that the Pokemon, though they appear the same physically, very clearly have some odd lighting or highlights going on here, which appear to be distinct from how we've seen them before. So I wonder the fact that Kangaskhan had a similar type of thing where he didn't physically change himself could support the idea that these actually are the Mega Evolution forms. Maybe they just didn't go all out with them. but as you said too, maybe it's a different kind of power-up or something else they're doing with these Pokemon. That seems like that'd be kind of redundant, though, don't you think, if it weren't?
Yeah, a little bit. And, there's a lot of different ways this game can go, especially because of the introduction of Mega Evolutions, as I said. The key thing here that I honestly just thought of is one of the new Mega Evolutions from X and Y was Mega Blaziken, who was one of the starters of this generation. The other two starters of this generation have no Mega forms. So does that mean we have to wait till the post game for the all? So I'm willing to predict that we'll get a Mega Evolutions of the other two starters of this game. I think that's very likely, especially with Torchic, in Blaziken, getting a Mega Evolution.
Okay.
So the key thing here again is: do we get a Mega Ring during the game, or is it not until the post game? And I think if it's a sequel, we'll probably see it during the game. If it's a remake, probably not until the post game.
So since you played all the previous Pokemon games, how big of a difference are these remakes as compared to the original games? I guess more specifically, how many elements from the newest game do they bring in? So like for instance, would having Mega Evolution forms in this game be that big of a deal compared to how we've seen past remakes function? It's
kind of difficult to say because there are some major differences that get brought in. For example, with the Fire Red, Leaf Green remakes, they brought in Pokemon Natures from Ruby, Sapphire, as well as Magneton, Magnemite and Magneton. They gained the Steel type in Gold and Silver, and they retained that, and that they didn't have the Steel typing during the original Red and Blue, and that was still part of it in this game. So they were the only Steel types that you could get through the main game.
Right.
So there are elements like that, and I think we could see even more things kind of like that, where they sort of stay true to what the game was, while introducing the elements that make sense to add for a remake.
Yeah, I guess going along with that line of thought, again, assuming this is a remake, though I guess even if not, a lot of this would apply. What would you expect them to upgrade in this game? Offhand, I'm guessing like you'd expect to see a full 3D world this time. I'm guessing they'd reuse the Pokemon X and Y engine. So what do you think they would add here, and what do you think they would change?
The graphics are, of course, the big one, but there are a lot of elements here. Like, I am so foggy on Ruby and Sapphire. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I believe there's like something like hidden tree houses or forts or something to that effect. So maybe you can like share those online with people. I'm pretty sure the player search system will make a return for this game in some form. I'm sure they'll update the game in those types of ways. I'm not sure if the world will get shrunk or enlarged at all, because the big thing with the Ruby and Sapphire games that a lot of people complain about is the fact that there's so much water, so it requires you to surf, and you remember how fun surfing was in Red and Blue.
Oh yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, and there's a high reliance on HMs, which have been decreased, pretty much since this game. They've kept petering out a little bit at how necessary the HMs are. So it'll be interesting to see how they balance those as well, whether they decide to go for the newer ones where they sort of find a way to make it so you don't need to do these things, or if they will stick true to the original and make it required.
Right.
It's just it's different things like that. I'm pretty sure that the whole fact that you can reuse TMs infinitely now will also be returning. That sort of thing. And the other thing, I just mentioned the return to the player search system. There's also the fact that, is Pokemon Amiga going to return? I mean, it's kind of necessary if you want to revolve Eevee into Sylveon. And there's also, of course, the easier way of doing IV and EV trainings with the Super Training. So there's a lot of elements from X and Y that make sense to bring into Alpha, Sapphire, and Omega Ruby. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see exactly what they keep, what they change, what they bring in, and how exactly these games are made, because there's been a lot of changes to Pokemon since Ruby and Sapphire.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess just to further clarify for me, when they remake these games, do they adhere closer to the original games or closer to the most recent Pokemon game? I mean, would these play more like the original version or more like Pokemon X and Y?
They'll probably play more like X and Y. Like, the rules will stay the same. They're not going to change the rules of the game to the back because they had different ways the stats were laid out and stuff like that. So they will probably adhere more to how it was in X and Y. So even like let's say Jigglypuff or Clefairy shows up. I forget if you can catch them in the main game. Probably. Gardevoir, of course, and Ralts. That got the fairy typing in X and Y. It was not a fairy type, of course, in Ruby and Sapphire. There's a good example of how it will stick to the new, but the structure of the game, like how you go through the world, the actual storyline, all that stuff, will stick very closely to the original.
Now, speaking of the story again, I want to get back to the idea, perhaps, of this being a new game. And, this is me saying it as, again, someone who doesn't know anything about Pokemon. So, if I'm way off base, guys, just blame me, not Derek. So I had one idea talking to you about this before the discussion. I think you mentioned to me before that the story in the original game was that, they were trying to use these two Pokemon in order to take over the world, right?
Basically change the world. Team Magma wanted to create more land, Team Aqua wanted to cover the world in oceans. They both thought the different element was like the key element that should be part of the world.
So I'm wondering, what if this is actually a spin-off game? Like, what if it takes... Because obviously when you finish that game, you stop that. You put an end to that problem that didn't happen. But what if this is like a spin-off, like, alternate universe type thing, where it actually takes place in those worlds, where it has been taken over by, more land or more water? Because they do say, again, a new adventure and a dramatic new world. That'd be pretty dramatic, don't you think, if you are exploring a world full of water or one, I guess, all land?
You're quite right. I think that's incredibly ambitious if they decide to do that, because not only would the Pokemon that you find and some elements like that would be different, the entire structure of the adventure would be different. So it'd
be dramatic.
Yeah, it would.
And new. And the world.
Yes. But I think almost too dramatic in those ways. It's almost too ambitious for it. But if they
I counter that with the fact that they say epic.
Yeah, true enough. I'd love to see it. I think that'd be really cool. It'd give even better reason for people to buy both versions. I just don't see it happening. Good idea, but just don't see it happening.
No, there was something you told me, Derek, about this, and it seems like there was some maybe mild blowback. It probably happens every time. But, some mild blowback for some people being that, is this too many Pokemon games? And Pokemon X and Y really do seem like they just came out. Wasn't that long ago. And now we already have, another pair coming up, basically just about a year after the previous games. Yeah, so what do you think about this? Do you think it is too many Pokemon, or do you think it makes sense?
At first I was thinking, yeah, it probably could use a break, but I decided to do some research. Like, okay, let's take a look at the years. Ever since Pokemon first came out in 1998, there's only been 3 years in the United States where we have not gotten a single Pokemon game, main series Pokemon game at all from that time. The only time we have not gotten a Pokemon game is 2002, 2006, and 2008. So ever since 2009, we've been getting a new Pokemon game every year. Now, the way they sort of break that up is that a lot of times it's either extensions of the original game, so what people were expecting for X and Y was to be a Z, or a remake of a previous generation. And what's interesting looking at these years and these releases, there is a kind of pattern that does emerge. And basically what it is that you have the new generation show up, and then after that will be typically a remake of a previous generation. Basically, we don't get a generational remake until a new console. So if we ever do see a Diamond Pearl remake, it probably won't be until the next system after the 3DS.
Now, going off this pattern, can you guess what the next Pokemon game would be then? Or what type of Pokemon game it would be, rather?
Going back and looking at the pattern, it'd probably be the third form of X and Y.
Which would be our awesome which we mocked it before, being Pokemon Z.
Yeah, Zygarde.
With that amazing sea serpent.
Zygarde, well, you were partly correct.
Yeah, see? Go me, the guy who knows nothing about Pokemon. Actually got something right, kind of. And when would that come out?
And Pokemon Z will, based on this thing, it'll either come out next year or maybe 2 years after. It depends on how much development time they put into it. Not really sure, but probably next year we'll probably see it.
So do you have any final thoughts at all, Derek, on all this? Anything we didn't cover, or any final thoughts or final impressions?
Despite my lack of fondness for the originals, I am kind of looking forward to these games.
Well, you like Pokemon X and Y, right?
I did really enjoy X and Y, and I'm really hoping it'll be a situation sort of like what you had with Wind Waker, where you weren't a fan of the original Wind Waker, but you loved Wind Waker HD. Or at least really enjoyed it. I'm hoping for the same sort of effect where there's enough changes and upgrades and things that, fix the things I had problems with, that I do really enjoy and do end up enjoying these games quite a lot. Especially
if you're exploring a world full of water or land.
If you keep thinking that.
Just wait till it turns out I'm right, dude. That's you're gonna be in awe.
Maybe.
All right, well, I think that wraps up our Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire discussion. So thanks, guys, for watching. If you like this discussion, make sure to like us and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at GameXplain. You can find links to them in the description below, which is a great way to keep up to date on everything we post and more. And of course, keep an eye on GameXplain.com for more on these games and other things gaming as well, including tons more Mario Kart 8 because I'm not sick of it yet. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Bye.